So what I can tell you as a scientist is that there are two threads of lived human spiritual life: our capacity to be in deep relationship with the transcendent, the sacred. And the word applied to that is different across different traditions and religions. But no matter what religion we are born with or not born with, we are all born with a natural capacity in our brain, hardwired, through which to be in a transcendent relationship. Number one. And number two, to feel the power and love and guidance of that transcendent relationship as we turn towards one another.
Hey everyone, Raghu Markus back with Mindrolling, and I have a wonderful guest today who wrote a fascinating book, Lisa Miller, Dr. Lisa Miller. She's really a scientist, and it's a book called The Awakened Brain. And before we get too far into it, though, can you give us an idea of how you even, I mean, I know that you went through all of the rigmarole that one needs to do to become a doctor. And at the same time, just what are the threads that even led you to the kind of pretty rigid experimentation and that you've done over many, many years? It's pretty wild because of the material that you're speaking to, which is spirituality in our lives, is really lends itself. When you hear this and you see the proof, it's real. You know, for me, it was a whole other thing. What drew me to India back in the day, and so what were the things that drew you not to India, but to this true spirit inside us that you're speaking to?
So, Raghu Markus, may I start by saying how appreciative I am to be in dialogue with you, and how I honor and elevate what you're opening up in the middle of our civilization, right? Like a big porthole, welcoming in spirit.
Thank you, Lisa.
So I'm very excited to be here with you and share in this really life global saving endeavor, which you're helping to co-create.
Yes, quite the times we are in.
With solutions, total solutions.
Yeah, which this is, which you're bringing to the table. But how did you get anywhere near it? That's kind of what I want to know from years of being a teenager and so on, and getting into and school.
Well, you might find this to be of interest, but the first book that ever made sense to me, I picked up synchronistically, The Only Dance There Is.
Oh, really?
I read Ram Dass, and for the first time, there was a deep understanding of a reality that fit with my direct lived experience. And I was riveted. You know, I had not connected to so much of what I'd read in high school and even in college as I went on. But when I read Ram Dass, suddenly, you know, there was someone who saw the world, who lived in the world from a foundationally spiritual footing. You know, he walked spiritual landscape, and that made sense. So
how old were you, Lisa, then?
I was about 15.
Oh, okay.
And it was, of course, a blessing, a synchronicity that it landed. It jumped, as you know, that experience, I'm sure, of being in a bookstore in one book. It's almost in your mind's eye. This is your book. You've got to read this book. It jumps. And I couldn't believe it. The whole radical materialism, like a tea bag, I'd been dunked in radical materialism. It was how I'd learned science. It was how what I'd heard existed and didn't existed. You know, everything I'd ever heard was radical materialism. And suddenly there was a foundationally spiritual reality that was told in the most clear, you know, Ram Dass's voice, grounded, integrated way. And it was told with love. And then I knew no matter what I had to read from there on out, trudging through school, that, you know what, this deep inner knowing, it's in all of us. At the time at 15, within myself, the inner knowing, it was right. Because Ram Dass said so.
Yeah. Well, I had the same experience many years before that, but it was the same thing. People write all the time with pretty much the same experience. I guess it's a way that there's a trust just through his spoken word, through his voice. It engenders a trust, and that's we should talk about that a little later as well, because you do bring it up. Okay,
I felt like I was home.
Yeah,
I felt like I was home.
That's what everybody said, and it's funny. And if you ask people who met Neem Karoli Baba, Ram Dass is my guru, what's the most simple way you can say how that moment evolved for you? And home is everybody's byword. And it's funny because that home is not a matter of being, of course it was a matter of being around that particular being at that moment, but how many times did we experience that being at home through what you talk about in the book, synchronicities and just ineffable experiences that happen in so many different ways. There's only one home. I guess that's kind of what the reality is. So one great thing here in the book is just a definition of spirituality. How about that? Can you give us a definition? So anyway, people bandy this word about spirituality, spiritual path. What are we talking about? What is that?
Well, as you know, I wrote The Awakened Brain from the vantage point of all other people on Earth, a soul on Earth, and in my walk as a scientist. And so from the view of science, scientists don't define the spiritual reality. They don't define spirituality. But we are very good from the view of clinical science at identifying threads of lived human spiritual life that are game-changing onto the rest of our lives, and ever more to identify threads of lived human spiritual life so as to understand their origins and developmental path. So what I can tell you as a scientist is that there are two threads of lived human spiritual life: our capacity to be in deep relationship with the transcendent, the sacred. And the word applied to that is different across different traditions and religions, but no matter what religion we are born with or not born with, we are all born with a natural capacity in our brain, hardwired, through which to be in a transcendent relationship. Number one. And number two, to feel the power and love and guidance of that transcendent relationship as we turn towards one another, fellow human beings, fellow living beings. As we are built to perceive transcendence, so too we are built to perceive immanence, the reification, the formation of spirit, God, Hashem, consciousness in one another. So that capacity, relational spirituality, is all of ours. 7.2 billion people all are born with the capacity to awaken from day one in our brain. And yet, as compared to other innate capacities, certainly this is our birthright, but it is in need of deep cultivation. So, for instance, whereas our temperament, whether we're introverted or extroverted, whether we're high-strung or laid back, our temperament's half innate, half environmentally formed. This capacity for awakening is 1/3 innate. The circuits are in there waiting to be awakened, but 2/3 cultivated means we've got to do our share. It's a lift, and we've got to do it, whether it's meditation or prayer, service, right action, sacred text, whatever our way towards awakening, whatever our way towards being an open system in dialogue with the sacred force in us and through us and around us, that is a practice. It is a choice. And it is not willy-nilly that this is cultivated.
Yeah. I've told this before on this podcast, but Neem Karoli Baba said to us, you imagine we're early 20s hippies that made it to India because of Ram Dass. And he said, I've done everything for you, but I leave you the mind, which is what you were just addressing, is cultivating the practice. I mean, this is something we have to do. The other thing, of course, what else? You also talk about the feeling of awe or transcendence, right? Now, this is easily relatable with anybody who, of course, has done the fastest path towards awe and transcendence in our day, which is psychedelics. I'm curious, that's something that had investigated at all in any of these studies that you've done relative to awe and transcendence and interconnectivity and so on?
Well, I think, Raghu, you're raising a very important point. What is it, this awakening? And for some people, an awakening happens spontaneously. We are touched by source, who I call God, consciousness. You use your word, but we are touched, we are awakened. Some people, through practice, through meditation and persistent meditation and disciplined meditation, come into awakening. And some people can sort of spontaneously trigger, be at the trail's head of transcendent awareness through psilocybin. But no matter how we awaken, there's a difference between the experience in that moment and a fully integrated spiritual life. So, you of all people, you've led so many people into fully integrated spiritual life. I say there's at least 3 legs to the stool. And one is a practice to get back to the sacred, the transcendent, without having to use psilocybin tomorrow and the next day. We don't need to go back and touch the stone, every 3 weeks. And that, again, meditation, prayer. The second is whether you say the Sangha, the Minyan, what at Columbia we call the Journey Group, fellowship, that we are traveling like all through time, effectively through the desert or up the mountain with our journey group. So we have the practice, we have the journey group, and then we need a roadmap of reality, a language, a set of understandings so that there can be a conceptual embrace and a word to call the transcendent. Again, mine is God. Yours could be source, Hashem, Allah, Jesus, Spirit. You pick your word. So that 3-legged stool can really support a deeply integrated spiritual life. How we are awakened is really the double doors swinging open into the spiritual path.
It's interesting. You talk about, mention rather the reality of, in this case, psilocybin, psychedelics opening a door, but, going back to it, got to open that door again because I need that hit. We are now working on representing Ram Dass's purview around psychedelic insight with science and spirituality, as I mentioned to you when we talked a few weeks ago. And it is all about integration and what you just mentioned, the 3-legged stool, one of them being practice, whatever it may be, is extremely important. Hey, can I get you to tell this story? I love this story that's in your book. The disheveled and distressed man yelling at other passengers, "You want to come sit with me?" Can you tell that story?
That's my favorite story. Thank you for asking about that story. So, I'd been struggling as a scientist to make sense of data sets. How is it that spirituality, that rich 2/3 embrace that cultivates our natural spiritual core, how is it that spirituality is formed, and what does it look like when we have really realized our natural awakened brain? And here I am pondering this for days on end, weeks on end, obsessed with the numbers. And because I was obsessed with this question, I was on the subway on the way to work on a Sunday. I joke that this was BC, before kids. And there I was on a very hot August day waiting on the platform in New York. What that point was the 1-9, the Red Circle line up Broadway. And, for those of you who've ridden the subway in August, it can be a long wait and it can be a hot wait, and it's not an air-conditioned wait. And, finally a car comes rumbling by and it passes on by, as does the next car come passing on by. And so when the third train comes, it is packed. I mean, packed. Mm-hmm. And feeling pretty clever and deft, I hopped on the one empty car quickly to discover why, which was that there was a very frustrated and increasingly agitated homeless man. And as each person came on the subway car, he would say, hey, you, do you want to sit with me? And the folks would look at him and then they'd dirt to the far end of the car. And then the next stop, 86th Street, 96th Street, 103. You going to sit with me? You can sit right here with me? Look at him, turn their head, not say a word, and book to the other end of the car. So that's why the car was 2/3 empty. Mm-hmm. Well, this goes on and he gets more and more agitated and he starts yelling even louder, hey, you across the car, you in the blue shirt. Do you want some of my lunch? And he starts throwing his lunch full length of the car. You want some of my lunch? And he's throwing it everywhere. And everyone's response is to basically be terrified and turn their back to him. Mm-hmm. 116, 125, 135, 145. The doors open up and on walks a regal couple. It is a magnificent woman in a white pillbox hat, white gloves, and a beautiful green pastel dress, and her little matching granddaughter in a pink pastel dress, also with little white gloves. And so, of course, everyone cringes because they know what's coming. And sure enough, like clockwork, you too, as they step onto the car. You're going to sit with me right here, sit by my side, without missing a beat. The two look at each other, nod, and walk right over and sit by his side, touching hip to hip. And everyone in the car shifts and is aghast. And he can't believe it. And someone has actually honored his very being. Someone has noticed him and he pushes it. He's like, so you want some of my lunch? And he tosses some of his lunch their way, right there by the side. And together, without missing a beat, they look at each other, nod, no, thank you. And he can't believe it. He said, you sure you don't want some of my lunch? Nod. No, thank you. This goes on and on and on. He's testing. Is it really true that you behold me? And so it was obviously Sunday, as I mentioned, and these two beautiful grandma and granddaughter were going to church. And I don't happen to be of the Christian faith, but I was absolutely taken. And what went through my mind and my heart was, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was clear as day. And what was in the nod, not even a word was said, was that this torch had been passed. This was the intergenerational keeping of the flame. Mm. The intergenerational keeping of the flame was the rich embrace of the natural spiritual heart, the natural awakened brain. Mm. And I realized that it is not necessarily, in fact, very rarely, the data shows is that by picking up a book at 20 or 30, that we find transcendence, but it is in walking the walk and talking the walk generation after generation, or perhaps a grandma figure, a grandpa figure, if not your own grandma or grandpa. It can be a teacher. It can be a counselor. It could be someone who truly has your best interest in mind, but it is through the passing of the flame.
Yeah. That's a great story. It's very much, Ram Dass used to tell a similar story on a subway in Japan where, you know, an Aikido guy was acting. I mean, a man was acting up, and a guy who was an expert in Aikido ended up just being in that calm space of acceptance and presence that changed the whole vibration of the train car that he was on. It's a great story.
Well, see, now that's a very good point, because the whole car shifted after watching grandma and granddaughter. Everyone was awakened.
Yeah.
And that is who we are to one another. You know, like a picnic blanket, we spread this out. We're antennae, capturing and transmitting sacred presence.
Yeah. Now, you talk a lot about, we should bring this up right away, because this is very important information that's been scientifically validated, which is around spirituality and mental health. And there's so much depression and anxiety and much worse that is going on, especially with next gen, you know, with teenagers and so on. Can you talk about just how you got to those findings and what they really mean, and it's no BS. It's not an academic saying this stuff. This is, your own personal interaction.
So I'll start by simply saying there's nothing at all in the clinical science and the social sciences. We have nothing in science as profoundly curative and then to ensue protective against the diseases of despair, addiction, depression, and even suicide as an awakened heart, an awakened mind. When we awaken, when we realize our spiritual nature, when we draw into deep dialogue with the sacred presence in us, through us, and around us, we live an entirely different life. Okay, what is the magnitude of these findings? When we say, I turn to my higher power for guidance, nature is a sacred home. My personal spiritual life is foundational to me. When we live on the landscape of spiritual awareness, we are 80% protected against addiction. Or put more specifically,
really? That's huge.
It's jaw-dropping, right? Nothing else is of that magnitude. We are 90% less likely when we are otherwise at high risk to have recurrent major depression. We are, this is perhaps one of the most staggering findings that, we live in a time where the number one cause of death alongside auto accident is suicide for Gen Z. A high school student, a college student is as likely, number one killer of young people, to take their own life as they are to be in a car wreck.
Wow.
Okay, how'd we get here? And what is this? We are built, is what we can say as we stand back and look at now thousands of peer-reviewed scientific articles. We are built as inherently spiritual beings, and we must realize our core, our natural spiritual core, to be fully whole. Just as we are physical beings, emotional beings, cognitive beings, we are all spiritual beings. We know this in science through the lens of a twin study. We can look at twins raised together, twins raised apart, and factor out commonality as a function of genes, as a function of environment. And we just know this. We are inherently, naturally spiritual beings. Religion is 100% environmentally transmitted. It's a gift of our parents and grandparents. We might choose a faith tradition and immerse ourselves. Religion is a gift of environment, but spirituality is innate. And only when we realize our birthright are we made whole. We absolutely cannot get by in life with a big donut hole. We can't function that way. So, to the epidemic of our time, when we have a strong spiritual core and when we share our spiritual life in the Sangha, the Minyan, the journey group, fellowship, we are at 82% decreased relative risk of completed suicide. There's nothing that is 1/3, 1/4 as protective against this epidemic of suicide in young adults. Everyone I know knows someone who knows someone who's attempted suicide.
Yeah.
Everyone I know, every young person, when I go to a university and I say, who here knows someone or knows someone who attempted suicide, every young person raises their hand. So we don't have a choice. We can't ignore this science with any sense of responsibility to the rising generation. It's really no longer a choice. If I said there's a pill, here's a pill, and you can give this pill to everyone in the high school, everyone in the university, every Gen Zer. And this pill is 82% protective against the epidemic of suicide. It would be negligence to not hand out that pill. So when we know that spirituality is the way forward, is the only way forward to strengthen this next generation, it's not a matter of, is this the right move? It's about how are we going to start rolling this out? And Raghu, what you're doing is one of the most profound answers to the challenge of our time, which is allowing people together and each in their own path to awaken their own natural spiritual awareness.
Okay, let's say you're 15 years old. So you were 15 when you read that book, Ram Dass's?
Yes.
Okay, so you're 15 years old. And you're being picked on in high school, and you're having a terrible time of it. And social media, of course, is exacerbating that by huge degrees. And are you saying that the human being in that at that age of evolvement that is connected to the description you made that I completely, I'm at one with around spirituality, how are they connecting with it in a way that actually can make a difference in that vast depression because you just got dissed on social and school and you're feeling like I can't take this anymore? How are you suggesting that the innate spirituality that is in all of us comes to the fore for somebody in that moment?
I think we can help that 15-year-old with both forms of natural spiritual awakening. The first, a direct relationship to the sacred, to God, to the transcendent. And the second, to feel that radical, unconditional love, which they deserve and which every living being deserves. We can do both. So the first is, I hear you struggling. I see this cruelty. I want to invite you, if you'd like, to sit by my side in meditation, to join me in a prayer and help them in that moment develop a spiritual response to suffering so that when they face betrayal or cruelty, there is a deeper, wiser presence, that of ultimate love and guidance to which they have and with whom they have a direct relationship. It's the most important thing we do. If you were to say, there's one thing I want for my kids, and I have 3 kids and they're all in the zone, Gen Z, I want them to be able to turn to who we call God, you use your word, and be in a deep lived relationship. Feel that they are buoyant, they are loved and held. Know and hear and see how they are guided. Realize that they're never alone. These are not just forms of perceptions. These are our human capacity to perceive what is real, the loving guiding force. And the second thing that every young person needs is an understanding of, okay, when those kids were pretty nasty, that sounds pretty mean to me. Where were they looking? Were they looking in your eyes? Were they looking in your soul? Or were they looking at your clothes? Or were they looking at your, accomplishments or lack thereof, your money or lack thereof? Were they looking outwardly or were they looking at your soul? And how do you want to walk as a soul on earth? So not to be reactive to a world that is full of power struggles and really the illusions of radical materialism, but how as a source of love, as a source of ultimate love, God's love, spirit, do you want to walk? And with whom, we can love all people, even if they don't love us back. We can move beyond ourselves, even if others around us don't move beyond their self. But with whom do you want to spend your time? And are these people that can look you in the eye and see you as a soul on earth? Both are forms of relational spirituality. And both are literally, Raghu, using the same neurodocking station in our brain. Our awakened brain is the same set of circuits, whether we're talking to our higher power or feeling that ultimate radical unconditional love towards one another. And this is where the deeply loving humanist is using the same part of his or her, their brain, as a devoted Orthodox Jew or evangelical Christian or profoundly practiced meditator. It's one spiritual brain, but can we both access ultimate reality and then live from that place?
Right. So, of course, we're speaking to the family being very connected and seeing what is going on and moving in to create a space where this child can get into the reality of their intuitive trust, really, in there is something other than what you think, what you tell yourself, your neurotic tendencies, your habitual patterns. There is something beyond all of that. I'm starting to have this dialogue with my grandchildren. Your kids are like teenagers now, and so on.
20 to 23.
Oh, okay. They're not teenagers. They're old already. So here the word that comes in that is, I think, most important to transmit what that reality is trust. And, a few kind of funny stories about, I asked Ram Dass, we were talking about trust. And I said, when I first met you, it would be like you reading the book. I looked in your eyes and I felt complete trust. Now, actually, I heard him the day before I met him because they sent over a tape they wanted me to promote on radio. I was program director of a major radio rock and roll station. So as soon as I heard him speak and the quality of his voice and delivery, never mind what he was saying, trust, I had, it was immediately, oh, okay, I get this guy. And then I met him. So I was telling him in this retreat that we were at, trust for me was that moment where you just created a space of unconditionality. It was what I needed. It wasn't what Ram Dass or Richard Alpert cared for. And that was an unusual experience. I think I never had that except maybe with my mom when I was a baby. So that trust became it was held by intuition, that trust. And it led me through the rest of my life. And let's talk about trust in terms of what you're speaking to, whereas spiritual nature, once it's revealed, even in a young person, it can be revealed. I mean, I know it, I've met lots of them. But somehow they have opened the doorway to their intuition, where trust can really be cultivated.
If we can think back to what it's like to have a young child or a new baby in the home. I experienced that as really a porthole to the infinite. You could just feel like that side of the house felt different. It wasn't just like there's a cute little baby or even a loving little baby. They're an outright porthole for the universe. And the look of a newborn baby in the first, week, if you're up at 3 a.m. with a newborn baby, he or she, they'll throw you a look that looks like they're, 680 years old. They're wise. So, I think that we are built to know and see that we're loved and held, we're guided, and we're never alone. Well, the loved and held is the same loved and held that, as you put so beautifully, you may have held as a baby in your mother's arms. Well, that is the same seed of perception through which we are built to perceive that we're loved and held by Source, by the universe, by God. This is, and why is that so important? Because that is the deep nature of reality. To realize and live where we are loved and held and guided means that we are walking in alignment with the landscape of the universe, of the world around us. There's a beautiful practice, Raghu. Would you allow me to share a practice that draws on this point?
Oh, no. We can't be having any practices. Oh, no. Of course.
Okay, good. I wanted to play by house rules. Okay.
No, there's no house rules.
Okay, beautiful. This builds on the point you're opening and offers an experience in this realm. I always thank the teacher who gave a practice to me, and this was shared by the late Dr. Gary Weaver. I'm going to invite you in this 90-second practice to take 7 breaths and clear out your inner space. I invite you in your inner chamber to set before you a table. This is your table. With your eyes closed in your inner chamber, I invite you to bring to the table those who truly have your best interest in mind. You may invite anyone, living or deceased, who truly has your best interest and mind. And with them all sitting there, ask them if they love you. And now you may invite your higher self, the part of you that is so much more than anything you may have done or not done, anything you may have or not have, your true eternal higher self. And ask you if you love you. And now finally, you may invite your higher power, source, whatever your word, whatever your understanding, and ask if they love you. And now with all of these people sitting here right now, what do they need to share? What do they need to tell you now? What do you need to know? When you're ready, I invite you back. This is your counsel, and they are always there for you.
Mm. That is the beauty, is it not? I don't think we can leave out in this podcast the one story of, which is pretty incredible, of you having children and going through what you went through, which was quite intense. And would you mind? I know it's a long story, but certainly the ending of it is spectacular.
So Raghu, thank you for asking. It's really the story that made me feel that without a deep spiritual bearing, life simply makes no sense. And it was the story in my own journey that was reflected in the science, but it was only through the walk that I would really stand here and come forward and say it's with a spiritual core and only with a spiritual core that we are made whole. So I'll share with you the story that started when, I would describe in our 20s, my husband and I were married very young. Our friends kind of joked that I was a child bride. I was 24, which I was all that young, but in my time it was, and my husband was 25. And I would say that we were ambitious and healthy. That's what I would say about our 20s. He ran after the ball he wanted, and I ran after the ball I wanted, and we had the jobs we wanted, and we had the home we wanted, and everything was great. And then as the clock struck 30 years old, we decided now is the time. Now is the time in our sort of implicit plan that we want to start a family. Let's pull the cord. And after perhaps a few months, nobody came. No kids were conceived. And we thought, well, we've got to clear space for this. So we booked a trip. We went to the Caribbean. No kids. We booked another trip to Sedona. No kids. And after this rolled on for about a year, I started to get a very hollow, probably frightened, anxious feeling, sort of a creepy feeling, a shadow figure coming up from behind me. What if you can't get pregnant? What if there's something broken or wrong, or this just isn't going to work? And that was a very scary feeling. And as we went further down the path and further down the path, IUIs and IVFs and still no children, it became very depressing. And we looked so depressed that after about 2.5, 3 years of this, our friends thought we looked pretty gutted. They were kind of afraid for us. But even as things became very, very painful, and each failed in vitro felt like a funeral, like that tiny little embryo had died, no baby, nothing. We were very depressed. We started getting signs, sort of indications that we weren't at this alone. What heated up were synchronicities, the sudden arrival of meaningful books and teachers, What heated up were confluences far too unprobabilistic to have ever happened by chance. And we realized that we were not at this alone, that we were being guided, that we were loved and held. But something in me, despite having this sort of gradual wearing away of my ego and a gradual chipping at it form of awakening, couldn't let go. I mean, I was sticky fingers. I've got to have a baby. They've got to have, my husband's good looks, and they have to have my sense of humor and our, oh, we're oh so smart. They got to be just smart like us, and this sort of ego view of parenting. Got to make it happen. Got to make it happen. So we just upped the ante, and with no conceptions, we fired the doctor and went to one with higher rates. And after that doctor didn't make us pregnant, active voice, we found the one in the whole Northeast who had invented in vitro sea urchins. That we did our research. As this was moving along, the trail angels, who I speak of in the Awakened Brain, people who just show up out of the blue and say the right thing, started coming more and more frequently. So, for instance, there we were, my husband and I, having just had an in vitro with the folks who invented in vitro, sitting in a hotel. It was just one night, so we'd splurged, very overpriced hotel, but just one night. And I reached for the remote, and Raghu, I'm not kidding, the remote would only go to one channel, and one channel alone. I mean, well, how much was this? Why isn't this working? My husband bangs the remote as he does on the bedstand. But there's one show. And what is that show? It is an interminable documentary of a little street child, an orphan, who lives in a huge garbage dump in a different part of the world. And through the translator, the little boy says, I don't care that I live here in the trash. I don't care that I can't go to school, but it hurts so much to not be loved that I sniff glue to make that pain go away. And I thought, you know what? We have been sitting here now crying our eyes out for 3 years. I sniff glue to make the pain go away. What is parenting? Parenting is love. It's deep, deep, radical, unconditional love and commitment. It's not, my husband's good looks and my sense of humor, and it's love. And this was the type of synchronicity that was absolutely starting, like a red carpet rolling out before us. Hey, walk this way. So my husband turns to me there in the overpriced hotel and says, listen, there's a child out there for us. And he's the civilian in the couple, right? I spent 20 years studying spirituality. He turns to me and says, it is self-evident. There's this child out there for us. And this goes on. So, but still, I sticky fingers. I couldn't let go. One more in vitro. Come on, just one more. Insurance covers it. One more. So we go up, we up-ratchet it again, another team. And I just have this terrible feeling. I just have this horrible, horrible feeling this isn't going to take. I get out of the car, we pull up to the house, get out of the car, walk up our steps to the front door. And right there on the front step, right by the door, there's this little shiny gooey thing. And I don't know what that is. And I lean forward, and there it is. It is a dead duck embryo on my front door. I mean, that's like biblical, Jesus. Right? I mean, it's on your doorstep, right? And I think, I'm like, obviously, this in vitro isn't going to take. There's going to be, this little embryo is not going to make it. I'm totally depressed. I lie down in my study by the river where we live, and I fall asleep. And Raghu, suddenly I hear, t-t, t-t. I'm like, what is that? And I get up and I go over to the window. T-t. And it's the mother duck. The mother duck has come up to my window. I've never before in the years after that day and that day alone. And I look forward, and she's trying to get in, and she's brought me a worm, a beautiful, plump worm to comfort me, the best gift she had, the best thing she knows. She lost her little embryo, and I was about to lose mine, as I did. Right? So not only do we show up for one another as human beings, all living beings are in this journey together, this one sacred symphony. this continues, Raghu. I mean, one after the next. I get on the bus after the next, and I'm totally depressed now. I mean, now we're 4 years in, and it's the bus. I'm late because I'm depressed, and everyone thinks I look hideous, and I'm picking at my skin, and I used to look so cute, and now I look so depressed. And I'm on the bus. It's late. It's probably 11:30. I'm in the way back row. No one's on the bus because it's so late. The commuters are done. And who should get on the bus but this quite extraordinary, unusual looking gentleman? And he's walking towards me. And I think, oh, no, like I don't have anything in me to be chipper and friendly. And he keeps walking towards me. I'm like, no way. He walks all the way to the back of the bus. This rather unusual gentleman plops down just one seat from me and says, you know what, lady? You look like just that type of lady who would go all around the world adopting kids. You know that?
Oh, God.
And Raghu, he gets off at the next stop. Who takes a bus for one stop? So we are loved and we are guided and we are never, ever alone, ever. This was the lesson, that we're in dialogue with a loving, guiding universe. And not only in the incarnate sense, that consciousness, spirit is foundational and we're trail angels for one another, but in the direct sense as well, both forms of relational spirituality. And I share in the awakened brain, waking up one night, just boom, sitting up straight, being awakened, really. And Raghu, it was beautiful. Space and time opened up. So it was a gentle, thick night, and just very gently, space and time opened up. There was a luminousness, as in like Lila Tove, the peace and sparkle of the night. And then I hear a very profound, sacred voice, and there's a sense of approach of this presence coming. If you were pregnant now, would you adopt? And Raghu, this voice was so profound and so sacred, you wouldn't dream of deceiving this presence or even deceiving yourself in this presence. Right? And I said, no. I said, I feel I'm drawing closer to being someone who would, but no. And very gently, the night closes back in and folds and is silent. It was an extraordinary, moving, mystical experience. I look over and my husband's out cold, totally asleep. And this sacred presence comes back again when I'm further down the path. Very similar, nearly identical experience. So now twice the presence has come. And we're moving along and the ego is wearing down, and I'm giving up the idea that somehow we control our lot in life and decide that we're going to make a family, and that health and success were illusions of tremendous radical control. What I now call achieving awareness. And so far down the path that a synchronicity lands squarely between the eyes. I get a call. My name's Lisa Jane Miller, and I'm actually named for the same great aunt as is Jane, my older cousin. I'm Little Jane, she's Big Jane. And Big Jane calls me and says, Little Jane, she calls up my office at Columbia. She says, you're sitting there studying spirituality, and she's always kind of handed it to me, But if you really want to understand spirituality, you've got to come out here. And I've actually gotten you invited to join me for a Lakota healing ceremony. And then her voice softens. And she says, I know you've been trying to start a family, and I know you and Phil are looking for your child. And I just wonder if these people can help. So after now 4.5 years of the best medical teams up and down the East Coast of the United States, I find myself in an inipi, in the sweat lodge, with a group of women, all of whom are Lakota, Sioux, and me, who's just landed from New York, dressed in black. And very graciously, the woman who introduces herself as the medicine man's wife says, I'd like to open and each person say why you have come. And the first woman says, well, I've come. Ooh, Raghu, I forgot something very, very, very important. Can I share one more piece? Are we out of time?
No,
okay.
No. Time is
okay. Okay. Thank you for letting me share this. Thank you. You walk the spiritual path. You walk it. So there I was, Phil and I, abject misery, right? Abject misery. And right before, within a week of Big Jane's call, we had found our way to an adoption agency. We'd gotten the message, the child in the garbage dump and the man on the bus. It was pretty clear there's a child out there for us. And even while I was hankering to continue with IVFs, it was undeniable. We knew in our heart there was a child, there was a soul on earth, and we were his or her parents. So we went to an adoption agency. There's a woman who was a clergyman's daughter who had made 800 families. You'd say she was the torchbearer. She was the midwife, if you will, the spiritual midwife of 800 adoptions to create 800 families. And there we were sitting with her, and she said, okay, you've got to be honest here. This is, she took this tremendously seriously. She knew that this was very sacred work. And she said, you've got to tell me with great seriousness, what are you looking for in a child? And I said, I certainly don't care if this is a boy or a girl, and I certainly don't care what race this child is, but please, a child who can love. And my husband, we're both Leos. He leans in, kind of shoulders me out of the way and says, yes, all that, but kind of a girl. And the other Leo, myself, leans in and says, yes, but a child who can love. And we go back and forth, and she hears the story. From there, we head back, and Big Jane calls. And Big Jane says, you've been invited to a ceremony, a healing ceremony of the Lakota Sioux. I get on a plane. I cancel my appointments at Columbia. I go out to South Dakota, and they're sitting in the Inipi. For the first time, I feel like maybe I have a chance. Like maybe we're going to have this family. And there we are. The medicine man's wife starts and says, I'd like to start by going around. Why have each of you come? Very sacred presence. And the first woman speaks. She's come to the Inipi. She says because she's there for her son. Her son is now 40. He's not coming home. He's starting to use drugs and alcohol. She's worried for the children. And the next woman speaks, and she says she has come for her son. Her son is 14, and he's just started using drugs, and she's worried he'll get addicted and go down the slide. And the next woman speaks for her son, and the next, until we get to Big Jane. And Big Jane says, I am here with my cousin, Little Jane. She is looking for her child. I'm wondering if we could help her find her child. And every woman looks me in the eye and understands and says, yes. Yeah. And I knew I was in the right place. I knew. Sort of like the way when I first encountered Ram Dass, that I was home, which was, of course, in the unit of reality. And there we were, and we prayed. And when we prayed, Raghu, there was a sense of praying for each and every woman and her son in the Inipi and the us, the we, the collective spirit, the superordinate, and whoosh, up through the top of the Inipi. The prayer was sent, and you could again see it in your mind's eye. There was that numinous quality. So then after 5 years, that very night, after 5 years, a call comes. To this day, it's so deeply moving. I'm so profoundly grateful. We have found the Miller's child. The call came from the other side of the earth. It landed on my machine at the time in New York, and I was out in South Dakota that night. I picked it up in the morning. We have found the Miller's child. There are many terrific girls. We know Mr. Miller had wanted a girl, another kind of a girl. But this is the Miller's child, and this is a son, praying for sons. And so our child, Isaiah Lakota Miller, is named, of course, Isaiah for one world and peace and unity, and Lakota for the people who helped us find our son, Isaiah Lakota Miller. So I head back to New York. There's this euphoric sense they've found our spiritual child. My husband and I are thrilled. We see his video. It is just soaring love. That's a love I've never felt. I saw his video, seeing this little soul, arms slung around the nurse, pure spirit, radiant eyes. And in that instant of seeing him, I became a parent. Radical, unconditional love. Deep love. My husband and I were elated. We turn in, we go to bed. The presence comes back that night, third time. If you were pregnant now, would you adopt? Absolutely. I found my spiritual child. And that night, naturally, we conceived. Spiritual twins.
Amazing story. Absolutely. So, synchronicity is a big deal, everybody who's listening to this, is it not? And we all have it throughout our lifetimes. We just don't pay attention sometimes, or we belittle it and say, that's BS. It's coincidence. There are no coincidences. Absolutely not. This story should really help people realize the reality of this being such an important ingredient in the stew of spirituality, alongside of everything else we mentioned. Thanks for this, Lisa.
And what is depression? Depression is not off the spiritual path. Depression is on the spiritual path.
That was a wonderful thing. Yeah. Night of St. John of the Cross.
Yes.
Right? Night of the...
dark night of the soul.
Dark night of the soul, yeah.
And the wearing away of illusions of control, that suffering is in part because of the obsession with the self and the obsession with control. And, if I'd simply, and I'm not against medication, but if I'd simply medicated away the symptoms and call it a day, I would have missed this extraordinary journey that is available to all of us for spiritual awakening, every one of us. So I've come to understand, both through my journey and science, that despair and depression is a knock at the door for spiritual awakening.
That I put a little caveat. There are people that get support from whatever psychiatrists might write a script for, that ends up helping and gives enough space for enough of an amount of time to be able to connect with that deeper part of ourselves. So,
Raghu, I'm with you. And what I'd say is, yes, absolutely. If you're in pain, medication's fine, but medication alone is insufficient.
No, right.
For the type of opportunity that's at our feet, which is the deeper awakening, the spiritual response to suffering. What life are you asking of me now? What source, God, Spirit, are you revealing to me now? And that is an unfolding journey. So, of course, there's no reason to be in abject pain, to your point. But yet, to simply get rid of the pain is to miss the opportunity. Get rid of the pain and say yes to the journey.
Ram Dass, his famous quote, "I love suffering. It brings me closer to God." Not that I'm asking for it.
Yes, no pins in the eyes, not to make suffering. Right.
No. Oh, it's so great to have you here, Lisa.
Amazing to be with you. Amazing. I love the space you create and welcome all of us into.
Oh, so wonderful. So everybody, we'll link up the book. The book is out, I think. Not long, but it just came out, right? Last month, maybe. And we'll link you up to Dr. Lisa, and as well as the Awakened Brain. And it'll all be in the show notes. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling. And you'll catch it all, not to mention all of the wonderful other podcasters, teachers, presenters, whatever you want to call them, on the network. And soon coming, I've been announcing this, but I think it's really going to happen now. Krishnamurti, who was a great philosopher, one of the great beings that brought back the East to the West, along with, we have Alan Watts already and Ram Dass, so we've got a triumvirate right now of the OGs. So everybody, thank you. Lisa, thank you. And
Raghu, thank you. Thank you.
There's so much more in the book around awareness that I wanted to get into too. We'll have to do this again. Okay.
I'd love to come back and talk more about the awakened brain. Well, you have a very awakened brain, so I can't wait to talk more about it.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.